and these do line up with the study overview. So you should know the different terms for the circulatory circuits, right? So, for instance, peripheral versus hepatic, or peripheral versus systemic, and pulmonary, and so forth, and be able to trace those pathways too. So if you were told the right side of the heart is receiving deoxygenated blood from the body, it's pumping it through, you know, which circuit. You should be able to name those circuits and say, okay, well that's pulmonary if it's deoxygenated blood going from the right side of the heart to the lungs, that kind of thing, okay? General questions regarding functions of the heart, you know, we always have those types of questions, whether it's a whole system or an organ. Like what kind of things does the heart do? Does it regulate blood supply? Does it generate blood pressure? Does it route blood? Specifically pertaining to what we just talked about, systemic versus pulmonary circulation, those kinds of things. Okay. Also some, what's the word I'm looking for? Anatomical just notes about the heart too, knowing the size of it, where it's physically located, apex versus base, and such like, right? Being familiar with that. Also, some of the membranes too. You should know, I won't tell you right now, what the pericardial sac is lined with. What is the name of that tissue, right? And that being said too, knowing the tissue layers of the heart as well. Epicardium, myocardium, endocardium. And we already went over some of the membranes too, knowing what the pericardium is, right, peri, around, that what holds the heart in place. Knowing the difference between, there will be multiple questions that will pertain to routing blood through the heart, okay, as you can imagine. So knowing where blood, for instance, in the pulmonary veins goes back to, right? Being able to answer a question like that. Knowing what place each chamber of the heart receives its blood from, right? If I'm in the right atrium, where did the blood that gets there come from? Well, you know, that's the body, right? It's deoxygenated blood from the body coming back there, okay? And flow too, right? That's kind of inflow, outflow too, right? What's going on from the respective ventricles as well. So when the right ventricle sends its blood out, where's it going? When the left ventricle sends its blood out, where is it going? You should know the direct connection between arteries. What do we call that? And valves too. Remembering where each of the valves is, of course, right? So if I'm an AV valve, that's helpful, right? Where are they? They tell it, the name implies, I'm between the atria and the ventricles. If I'm a semilunar valve, where am I, right? So you think about, am I a valve that's between chambers, or am I a valve that's, you know, controlling passage into a vessel kind of thing? And that being said, if I had a problem with a valve, right, knowing the next place in that pathway, right? So if there was a problem with one of my semilunar valves, you know, what's going to be the implication of that? Okay. Characteristics of cardiac muscle cells. Okay, remember they have some special characteristics in terms of their structure, right? Knowing their unique characteristics, I guess I'll put it that way. I know I already said multiple things about pathways again, but if you see something that's talking about the systemic or the pulmonary circuit, being able to apply that to the chambers of the heart, right? So just looking at that same kind of question in a different way. Layers of the vessels, right? So you should be familiar with those, the innermost, middle, outermost layer. What do we call that? Remember, particularly the lining, if you will, if we're talking about something small like a capillary. So matching up also, I should say, the name of the tissue that's in that layer as well. Differences between arteries and veins. Okay. Things like, you know, which one has thicker walls? Who has valves? What is the pressure like if I'm comparing an artery and a vein? Okay. Knowing the relationship between blood viscosity and flow. You know, obviously viscosity is resistance to flow, but how that affects other things as well, right? Does that affect pressure in a specific way? And then applying that kind of idea specifically to the aorta. Okay, what's the relationship there between pressure and velocity, right? And understanding that relationship anyway between velocity, how fast is the blood traveling, and how does that influence pressure? And that being said too, just in general, kind of globally, where is pressure highest and lowest in the specific types of vessels? And then two kind of things that kind of tie in the nervous system too. You should be familiar with the vasomotor center and knowing the simple kind of physiological effect on pressure of gravity, and by that I mean going from standing to sitting and vice versa. Okay. All right, we're still in our objective section, if you will. You should know what cardiac output is and stroke volume. Okay. Cardiac output and stroke volume. Along those same lines, what are we talking about with preload? Okay. And I should understand hydrostatic pressure and how to calculate mean arterial pressure. Okay. That being said, I'm being really nice today and giving you some very specific information. If you were to, let's say, be defining something like that, just writing down the letters of the formula is not enough. Okay, you can't say MAP equals blah blah blah. You know, you need to say what the elements of that formula are. Okay, hint, hint. All right. Last kind of portion relating to objective things. Again, know your valves. semilunar versus AV valves. Know the other names for valves too. Tricuspid, bicuspid, right? Mitral, right? Remember, since we were just talking about the bicuspid, we're talking about how it looks, you know, what the mitral valve is. Boy, our critical thinking question from today too helps us out with knowing what varicose veins are, okay? So problems with vasculature, varicose veins, aneurysm, know how to describe those. Arteriosclerosis, phlebitis, and you should know what the pacemaker of the heart is as well. And I'll make you think about this maybe a little bit too. Also be able to recognize distinct vasculature that's associated with perhaps assisting other structures in the cardiovascular system. How's that for vague? Can't be super specific all the time. All right, any questions about that stuff? That's all the objective stuff. All right. So remember, that's how you're matching up. You're looking at your study overview. That's that first section, terms and definitions. And now we're more into the conceptual part. And we know that that's analogous to the short answer questions. Everyone loves the questions about tracing a drop of blood through the system. Definitely be able to do that. Okay. And my reminder here that one sentence is not enough. You should be able to describe the conduction system of the heart, intrinsic, and again, this is another kind of trace your pathway sort of concept. So I would definitely be able to do that. Likewise, I would be able to describe a cardiac cycle and the parts of it, if you will, right, to go through the cardiac cycle and describe the events. Okay. All right. A couple more things. You should be able to recognize the relationship between a failure in a part of the symptom, a failure in a part of the cardiovascular symptom, and how that is directly related to signs and symptoms that you see. Okay, so, and my extra hint there is, you know, think of a typical problem, major problem that someone could have with the cardiovascular system. Okay. All right. Now, someone asked me this with our critical thinking questions today. Somebody said, which one of those will be on the test? I said, we'll get there. I would definitely know what, I pay attention to our friend Michael, even though it might not seem like it's exactly that patient. I would make sure I understood what happened to him, and perhaps a similar patient who might have something going on resembling his multitude of issues. Okay. be aware of, be able to describe the whole exchange process, at the capillary bed and network. How does that happen? How do things get from the blood into the interstitial space, etc. And then really one last thing, you should be able to explain the difference in the velocity of blood flow in different parts of the circulatory pathway. If you can do those things, you will be in good shape. All right. Test on Wednesday. Be here. We will be in the same room.